Hello. Welcome again, and for the last time today, to the Hydrogen and Fuel Cells and Batteries Group Exhibit 2016. I'm Robin, and today I have Mr. Eric Denhoff with the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association joining us this afternoon. Thank you very much. Maybe an applause, please. He came all the way from Canada. Awesome. Thank you very much. So our topic with the CHFCA acronym is the Canadian fuel cell sector's new growth trajectory. So my first question to you is, Canada has long had a leading role in fuel cell development. Is this still the case?
Yes, I think so. Canadian companies like Hydrogenics and Ballard, Greenlight Innovation, and others who are here today all continue to have a leading role in the technology, and so we've seen major new product developments from each of those companies in the last short while, and major sales as well. In addition, I think our universities, who are cooperating internationally with groups like Fraunhofer Institute and others, continue to do world-leading research.
Thank you. What are some of the recent successes of Canadian firms like Ballard and Hydrogenics, as you mentioned?
Well, quite a few, actually. You know, the Canadian industry, I think, like most of the fuel cell industry around the world, kind of went up and then back down and started to climb back up, particularly over the last year. So we've seen between Ballard and Hydrogenics, those two companies have sold more fuel cells for buses and trains and other vehicles in the last few months than their entire history combined. So if you look at just the number of fuel cells sold for buses in China and trains in France and Europe and the US for buses, Ballard and Hydrogenics alone have sold something like 2,300 fuel cell units for buses and trains, and that doesn't include material handling like forklifts. Companies like Greenlight Innovation have expanded, opened a new office in Germany, added product lines. Today announced that they were beginning to sell fueling dispensers. And other companies in Canada as well, I think, are doing equally well in an industry where overall worldwide there's been a lot of growth in the last year. Much more positive year. When I started this job 4 years ago, it was very depressing. I think you needed Valium or something to work in this industry. But.
So you mentioned the dispensers from Greenlight Innovation, and so I should ask what's happening in the fueling infrastructure in Canada in comparison to the US, Europe, and Asia?
Yeah, Canada's been quite funny because our traditional sources of power are so cheap and plentiful, natural gas, hydroelectric. It was very difficult to compete for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. But in the last year, again, there's been some significant change. Hyundai is now leasing cars in Vancouver. There's a dozen or 15 of them rolling around the streets of Vancouver already. We ran a request for proposals through the association a few months ago for a new station. Have awarded a Vancouver company, H-Tech, the contract to build a new station in Vancouver. The federal government, for the first time in some years, announced in their budget new support for fueling stations in Canada. They've got a request for expressions of interest on the web now, and they'll do an RFP for stations in May. And in addition, the government of British Columbia extended the incentive for fuel cell vehicles. So now there's some momentum to start more fueling stations in Canada. The OEMs are starting to work with us in a new hydrogen infrastructure initiative to determine the deployment levels of vehicles for the next several years. And of course, we make in Vancouver, Mercedes has the world's first automated fuel cell manufacturing plant in Vancouver, which is making fuel cells to ship back to Germany. And we continue to do a lot of work making fuel cells to ship around the world. We just don't use a lot of them at home yet.
Thank you. And much has been written about over the past year about power-to-gas technology. So what is Canada's expertise in the area?
Yeah, we're doing really well there. And you know, when I say Canada's doing really well, almost every venture that Canada's involved in has a partnership with an investor or an operating partner overseas. So we have terrific research partners with Fraunhofer Institute. Ballard and Hydrogenics both have a terrific experience in Europe. So Hydrogenics has sold to E.ON, one of the largest utilities in the world, obviously Germany's biggest. They've sold power-to-gas initiatives to E.ON to take surplus wind power from the German system use their electrolyzers and create hydrogen with it. You can then dump it into the natural gas network, which in Germany is very extensive, obviously, not only the pipeline network, but the storage capacity. And so there's multiple megawatt installations by Hydrogenics here. Interestingly, in Canada, they've done a joint project with a Quebec-based company called Tuglik, and they've put in a system in a very isolated northern mining community until now, which depended on diesel, very expensive and obviously quite polluting diesel power, which had to be shipped in. So now they've put in an electrolyzer wind turbine and some other pieces of equipment, and they've saved 2 million liters of fuel, diesel fuel already, in this one installation. And it has people quite excited because mining communities often are very isolated by their nature and often heavily dependent on trucking in, barging in, flying in, very expensive and polluting diesel. So Hydrogenics now has installations in a number of places on the power to gas front. And as well, Hydrogenics has a very interesting installation in Korea, a large stationary power installation, which will become the world's largest when they finish their next expansion of it. I think power to gas is in that very interesting stage. If you looked around here last year, there were literally dozens of people trying to launch into the power to gas stage, and as you walk through this year, there's about half as many as things consolidate and it becomes more commercial. And so we'll see over the next year, I think, larger installations and in a larger number of places. But Hydrogenics is doing very well in that space, yeah.
Yes, fantastic. We had an interview with them earlier on today. Now a bit about politics. How are the governments in Canada promoting the sector?
It's getting better. You know, we had 10 years of kind of a long nightmare under the Conservative government, and you know, they viewed hydrogen fuel cells as something the Liberal government had invented, and there was sort of these crazy people in Vancouver, and why did they want to invest money in it? So although we had tremendous support always from the federal public service, particularly industry and trade and others, at the political level we didn't have so much. The government that is in power now federally is the Liberal government, and they've made a very strong case for clean technology, not just ours. I mean, we have to compete against battery electric and natural gas and others, but the federal government for the first time said, okay, here we think, to be fair, hydrogen fuel cells should get a shot too. So in the budget, there's very strong mention of hydrogen fuel cell technology and some money to go with it. The federal government's put more than $60 million into new fueling stations for battery electric and hydrogen fuel cells, and they put new tax incentives in for investors in fueling stations, and they put money into demonstration projects as well. So it's a little early to tell exactly what the share will be for each of the technologies, but at the national level, there's much stronger support than there's been for a long time. At the provincial level, the British Columbia government has renewed the vehicle incentive for fuel cell vehicles, about 4,000 euros per vehicle, so it's a decent size incentive. And we're working on other provinces now to do the same. But Canada has become, again, a strong leader in environmental technology, and we have every reason to believe that fuel cells will form a big part of that future.
Thank you. And where do you see the fuel cell sector in the next 5 years?
In a big fight. Fuel cell sector will be in a big fight with the Tesla and battery electric. You know, the situation, I think, is very, very straightforward. There's a major battle that will take place. Battery electric has made promises around extending their range beyond the 200-kilometer range to try and equal the 400, 500, 600-kilometer range of fuel cells. The consumer loves the hydrogen fuel cell experience. They like being able to go into a fueling station and fill up in 2 or 3 minutes. They like having 400 or 500-kilometer range without worrying. They like the feel of the vehicle. Battery electric has a tremendous product in cars like Tesla and others. Hybrids have a place as well. If the success of the fueling infrastructure initiatives in Europe, in California, in the Northeast United States, in Japan and Korea take hold, if they are really successful, then I think hydrogen fuel cells will have a very good battle with battery electric. If we're too slow over the next few years to roll out the infrastructure, then we may give battery electric too much of a head start. But right now, you know, I always remind people, the chairman of Toyota, Uchima Maeda-san, was originally the chief designer of Prius, one of Toyota's most successful vehicles in history. And if you listen to him talk about why that company has invested well over €1 billion in fuel cell vehicles and why he thinks they're the vehicle of the future, it's very hard to make a bet against the guy who was the chief designer of one of the most successful vehicles in history and who's personally overseen the investment of probably €1.5 billion already. So if Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, and Mercedes are all making big investments in this technology, it's nothing to fool with. This will be a very serious battle between battery electric and fuel cell vehicles. We don't know who will win, but so far we're very much a contender. And Canada remains a strong leader, not the only ones. You know, we used to be the only game in town 10 or 15 years ago. Now the Europeans and the Japanese, the Koreans, even our dear friends the Americans, you know, are all in certain areas strong leaders. And one of the things we've learned, I think, is that if you want to take on battery electric and other technologies, you better cooperate among the leaders or you'll get left behind by the competition. And we see a lot of that happening now. Strong cooperation between Mercedes and Canadian companies, Ford and Canadian companies, Volkswagen, Japanese companies and Canadian companies. And I think this makes the whole potential for fuel cell vehicles to win that competition against battery electric much stronger.
Sounds like a good fight.
Yeah.
What are the key challenges to fuel cell moving forward, do you think?
Yeah, I think a few things. You know, we need somebody said to me this morning, you know, we need an Elon Musk, you know, we need a champion of the fuel cell side who's as photogenic and quotable as he is. And I think they certainly have done some. Tesla product's a very good product, but they have this superior spokesperson, you know, who is larger than life. And our industry is much more splintered. You know, Germany has a very good spokesperson in Germany, and Japan has a good one in Japan, but there isn't that sort of transcendent spokesperson. So battery electric has good marketing, and they're cheaper. You know, the vehicles are cheaper, the fueling stations are cheaper. Hydrogen fuel cell costs have come down unbelievably fast, and they keep falling. Our fueling stations have not come down as fast in cost. And so if you're a politician and I say to you, I can build you 100 or 200 battery electric fueling stations for the same price as one hydrogen fueling station, for a politician it's easy. I can get a lot more votes with 200 stations than with one. So the fueling stations have to come down. It's very interesting on buses. There will be an RFP for buses in Europe, I think for about 140 buses very soon in May. I think those buses will fall from about 1.2 million euros to about 700,000 euros, just by an order of just 140 buses compared to 3 and 5 and 9. So if you can imagine what will happen with fuel cell vehicles, everybody says, well, the new Tesla at $35,000, how will you compete? Well, we'll see. First of all, he hasn't made any at $35,000. He's promised to make some in 2018. But second, if you have orders for 10 and 20 and 30,000 fuel cell vehicles, they'll be $35,000 too. And you'll be able to fill them up in 3 minutes and drive 500 kilometers. So I think we need to bring costs down. Everybody knows that. We need to talk the story up a bit more positively. You know, we're a bit shy. You know, we need a few more Donald Trumps of the fuel cell industries. How big is a fuel cell car going to be? It's going to be huge. It's going to be a great car.
Huge.
So we suffer a little bit by the fuel cell industry still being a little bit insecure because we went up like that and then down like that and now we're coming back up. So I think it'll be a very interesting contest. Yeah.
So we still have time left. So can you describe how Canadian Research Institute, universities and institutes are doing in relation to fuel cell?
Yeah, you know, the Canadian government has put a lot of money and more recently into research on bringing down costs related to fuel cells. But Canadian universities aren't able to do it on their own. We've had tremendous cooperation with the Fraunhofer Institute, for example, who have a partnership with the University of British Columbia. We have very strong links with Japanese and Korean universities and others. So we have networks in Canada. It's not the same as the structure in Germany, but there'll be a 5 or 6 university network through NSERC in Canada, and they will cooperate with researchers cooperative in each of 5 or 6 universities, all working on a project to try and bring fuel cell costs down, platinum content down, or to work on trucks or other modes that maybe haven't had as much attention. One of the things I wanted to talk just briefly about today is that Canada remains really interested, strongly interested in forming more partnerships we have very unique funding arrangements. So if you're a research company in India, or you're in Spain, or several other countries we have agreements with, Canadian government will match up to $1 million or $2 million a research project that your government might put funds into that enables more research in this area. So Canada's been very strong. Our Trade Commission offices all over the world are really helpful. Unlike the American ones, you don't get charged for your services. The Canadian ones are free, which is a big benefit to our companies. So you can contact our trade commissioner services in the country and ask them about what the opportunities are for collaboration on research. The other thing is Canadian universities are still hiring. They're still being well funded by government compared to a lot of jurisdictions that are suffering. And they still are desperate to attract into Canada more STEM graduates. So we need science and technology graduates and need them in the fuel cell industry as well. So there are a lot of programs that enable foreign researchers to come to Canada, work on a project, and then stay in Canada afterwards. Not that we want to steal all the German scientists, but it's always nice to have a few more. Anyway, yeah. Thanks.
And we just have a couple of more minutes left. Is there anything else that you want people to sort of walk away with?
No, just I hope you'll visit the companies that are here, Hydrogenics and Dana, Greenlight, CSA is here, Ballard, of course, spread around this area over here, and they'd all be happy to talk to you in more detail about Canada.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, and we invite you to visit the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association's booth. That's CHFCA right behind Greenlight here. That is booth number D62. And so that was our last interview for today, and thank you again to Mr. Denhoff. Thank you.